Thank you for joining us this afternoon. A couple of housekeeping items to review before we begin this session. First, for our presenters today, there's a handout section in your control panel. You can find bios there. We encourage you to read about our esteemed panelists. Second, please submit all your questions to the Q&A box in the control panel. We'll be monitoring these questions during the presentation and have saved time to answer them at the end. This session is worth 0.75 CMs, and you can find those CM log information in the handout section as well. Finally, we cannot host this event without support from our sponsors who are listed on today's agenda and speakers' bios. Make sure you take a look at our annual capital and gallery level sponsors. Those can be found in the panel with the other documents as well in the handouts. Thank you for your attention, and let's get started.
All right, thank you, Devin. Thank you, APA, for having us today, and good afternoon. I'm Autumn Calder, your moderator for this session, and this session is sponsored by the Urban Land Institute of North Florida and the Capital Region section. My educational background is in planning with a master's degree from FSU, and I continue to learn new planning skills almost every day in my role as the Blueprint Director here in Tallahassee. If you're not familiar with Blueprint, and I assume many of you probably aren't because you're probably not from the Tallahassee area, and so welcome to learning about Tallahassee because this workshop's usually in Tallahassee. Blueprint is a city-county agency that's tasked with building infrastructure projects that are funded by our local option 1% sales tax. So while I may not be in the traditional government planning role, I do a lot of design and construction, but I work every day to build projects that improve our quality of life and set our community up for the most successful future. So it's natural that I would gravitate towards an organization like ULI, the Urban Land Institute, whose mission is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. And there are a ton of common interests between ULI and APA. And if you're interested in learning more about ULI, feel free to reach out to me. Today, we have two panelists ready to discuss how the pandemic is pushing cities to evolve. And they're here to help us understand how the private sector and communities are approaching these shifts. Our first panelist is Carlos Valera. He is a managing director for Gensler, where he's worked for the last 20 years, and he's currently based in the Miami office. Carlos is a registered architect in the state of Florida. He holds an MBA from Northwestern University. He's an industry expert and has been featured in publications like the Wall Street Journal. His recent work includes evaluating the impact of self-driving cars on cities, designing for sea level rise, and how to give the streets back to people. I think this crowd will find his presentation inspiring and insightful, and like me, you might even find yourself feeling a bit reassured. More of that to come. Our second panelist is John McNeil, a commercial real estate advisor for NAI Talcor. He's also based here in Tallahassee, but he works across the Southeast. He assists his clients, which include buyers, sellers, tenants, investors, and landlords in almost all aspects of commercial real estate business, including commercial real estate brokerage, site selection, leasing, valuation, landlord representation, tenant representation, and investment analysis. John was recently recognized as NAI Global's 2018 and 2019 top producer for Tertiary Markets, which are markets that are less than 2 million. I just learned that, by the way, as well as 2018 and 2019's top producer for the state of Florida. Wow. In short, he's analyzing the real estate markets every day to meet his clients' needs, so he knows what they want, what they can afford, and where they actually land. The sessions should provide a good balance of data-driven future casting and future proofing, as well as ground truthing for the realities of today. And I think you'll find that the two perspectives are not at odds. In fact, to know where you're going, you have to first know where you are, which is the first lesson in learning to navigate, but it's also the basis for a very solid, comprehensive plan. But as Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going to end up someplace else. So to avoid that, we're starting our presentation today with Carlos Valera, who's going to share his knowledge on rethinking the workplace and the future development of our urban areas.
Thank you so much, Autumn. That was a great presentation. And again, it's an honor. Thank you for having John and myself today, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So as we see on the first page, we're going to have today a discussion around the reimagined future of work and place. And we would like to start the conversation by in the dialogue, as Autumn mentioned, that we are a research-driven organization, and a lot of our design thinking and the opportunities that we present to our clients through the form of the built environment are always anchored through research. So as we look at this first page, I wanted to highlight that the data and the findings that we're going to be talking about today, or that we're going to walk you through today, is our newest and the latest research, and also build upon the last 15 years of the research institute that we have at Gensler. But more importantly, this research is used to really understand the impact on the physical place, how the employees or the collocation of people within buildings performance takes place around experience and the engagement. And actually, in fact, these findings have just been released in the last 2 weeks. So if you go through some of the stuff we have published, you can get direct access to a lot of the things you'll hear today. If not, let me know, and we'll be happy to share more specifics. But as I mentioned before, the research is a way how we future-proof and really inform decisions around how we actually start building and providing perspectives over time about how the workplace and the behaviors around employees actually becomes an interesting anchor for how cities and buildings and business districts starts to be informed as we go forward into this new world that we're living in. Pre-pandemic, obviously, we have conducted a lot of research through the specific WPS, which is the workplace service format, to really understand trends, benchmarking, and more specifically, the client's needs. At the outset of the pandemic, we have recognized that there was an immediate focus to really research and understand what are going to be the impacts of this working from home or working remote implications in the future of buildings, future of cities, and how all this comes together. And we had a methodology that again informed a lot of the ways that we came up with this point of view. So if we go forward into the goals, as you can see here, we really wanted to understand what are employees expecting? What are our co-workers or colleagues in any professional industry looking for companies to plan? How prepared are companies to really return to the office, if they return to the office? And kind of what work activities are occurring in the office? Now, when we dissect the data even more so, we see that even though it is still in the early stages, only about 79% of the respondents that we have through this research reported that their companies have announced an initial return to office plans to their employees, if anything. And it's also something that we see is ever changing as we continue to learn what works and what doesn't. As we look further into the next page, we'll see a little bit more into the specifics of the makeup of the respondents. And we see that of the 4 out of the 5 workers who know their company's return to office policies, here's what we learned and here's what they told us. 37% are required to return to the office full time. And again, this is a data point that is recent, but it's also something that we know that might be changing and shifting depending on user needs. We also saw that 54% of the companies that announce flexible work policies are ranging due to health or family care conditions, minimum days a week or the month that teams are looking to have, and also decide on their own schedules. But we also saw that about 9% of the companies have announced a complete flexible program in which people can determine their own schedules as they work in the office. As we look further down into the breakdown by the different groups that we had done the research around, obviously there is a lot of information that you can see here, but we started to breaking it down by industry. And there are 2 specifically that we want to highlight, which is something that will be intuitive to understand because they're kind of different ecosystems by themselves. But the consumer goods industry is one that is more likely to require everyone back into the office full time just because of the way how their work takes place. And obviously, it's not a surprise that throughout the pandemic, this specific industry reported that they were more likely to require access to a specific spaces, materials, and resources, just because, again, the way how the ecosystem works. However, the management advisory is the least likely industry to require people full-time in the office and more likely to give employees or their teams the option to define their own schedule. So there is many different ways that we can understand the data, but it's really interesting to see how and what doesn't work for different industries. We go into the next page. This is another way how we're looking at the data and our early findings, in which we're seeing that in the upper bar, we see that nearly half of the US office workers still have the preference to work full-time remotely under the current conditions that we have. And you will see that also this bar illustrates the number of days in which people are looking to work from the office. In the bottom bar, however, we see that workers are reporting what is ideal once the pandemic is over, if this is ever over. But luckily for us in Florida, we have a lot of opportunities to have choice and options how we want to engage with the work and out there. But you see a shift, more importantly, about how full-time remote and more days from the office actually are taking place. Let's go into the next page. Now, one key finding here is that we see that for the first time, we also add how employees would like to structure their time in the office, whether it was going to be full days in the office, partial days, or primarily come to the office for targeted and specific meetings, events, or for extended periods of time. And what we learn is that just under 0.5%, about 45%, actually prefer full days in the office. 2/3, 6%,
I think we may have lost Carlos there for a second. Did you lose him too, John?
Have to work full days from the office.
We lost you for a minute.
But again, this is something that we know that is changing as we go. 1/3 would really prefer to come to the office for specific meetings or events. Of them to expect to be able to have that flexibility. So as we now move from data, the research into the implications for city, and these, we can. Oh, okay. Make sure. Okay. Can you hear me, guys? John or Autumn? Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure audio is working well.
Well,
okay,
give it a second.
So now how do we go ahead, Autumn?
The audio is not caught up to your video, and we lost you a little bit on that last slide. Yeah.
Okay. Let me know when you can see the page that is orange.
Still on black, orange now.
Okay. So as we look at the page that is orange, we need to start now connecting the research with the implications for how the physical workplace and its role for a post-COVID world, and the implications overall in the city ecosystem. So as we go into the next page, and here's where we see one of the interesting impacts, in which we see this model of the distributed workforce ecosystem now to stretch horizontally and away from the traditional central business district, now to go all the way back into the home where we live and also we're also working now, and the spaces in between, really creating opportunities for a new interconnectivity that expands what we have traditionally seen as the urban fabric and the way how we build infrastructure for it. Now, our research is showing that while older workers tend to see work as a duality between home and the office, the Generation Z and the millennials, workers have fully embraced mobile and anywhere work, which is an interesting way how different, again, generations are embracing or taking differently as to how we see these work from home modalities. We also see clearly that third places and the city are extensions of the workplaces. And they also prefer to meet with their co-workers in person as these spaces to socialize and receive feedback. Whereas half of Generation Z respondents in our research, compared to only 1 in 6 boomers, I would prefer to give and receive feedback in person, and a co-working site or a third place. But anyways, there is a lot of different opportunities about how this could be all interweaved. And let's go more into the specifics of the next page, which is where we start to talk about and look into the distributed workforce performance. Good, okay. Now, with this knowledge, we have been working with our clients to define the workforce personas that kind of start informing, again, how do we create a built environment that allows for these different emerging type of user cases. And we often develop from to 5 that typically have bookends of mostly in the office or resident employees versus remote workers at the opposite side of the spectrum. But in the middle, we might be flex or rooming for workers that, again, there could be candidates for sheet sharing depending on the preferences of the company and the workers themselves. But by thinking this through and creating a space programs that are based on the assigned seating, as well as the percent remote workers, we're able to really plan real estate needs based on this new model of the distributed workforce performance. Now, the pandemic has brought gains and losses to workers. And as we look at the last several months, we all know that we have been challenged and perhaps we have lost something that we valued. Yet, there have been some silver linings in all this. And a few things have been gained throughout all this disruption. From commuting to wellness to organizational culture, our goal is to really understand and identify what have we gained that we can keep, and also identify those things that we have lost that we want to bring back. So there is a lot of positives and potentially negatives, but there is, more importantly, what we are defining a great opportunity to reset, which we're going to talk now next. So our cities have the opportunity for a once in a generation reset opportunity. And when we start to think about what that means, is that we see now there is a time to reimagine the buildings. It's an opportunity to actually take the streets back to be oriented for the pedestrians versus vehicles. But also we see a tremendous opportunity to start incorporating a green infrastructure and really build for a resilient, future-proof environment as we again create the cities of tomorrow. Now, we have come up with 5 elements that anchor what we are defining as the attributes of the resilient central business district, in which it is polycentric, diverse, connected, innovative, and local. And when we look at this polycentric concept for a second, it's about not having one heavy specific use to be the definer of how cities come together, but really having, if you think about the use of office, having the office used to be more distributed horizontally through the urban fabric as we talk. But there is so many other verticals, as we're showing here, that can help on that end. So let's talk about the implications and what should cities do based on these findings. So when we look at this polycentricity idea, is start building zoning that allows for it, that includes a more diverse mix of uses that actually creates walkable, pedestrian-friendly, human-scale places. And this is where the 15-minute city concept comes into play about how do we really start creating these adjacencies of uses that can really allow for this resilient city that, again, we have been talking about, but also is rethinking the function of the central business district to be less 9 to 5 and be more 24/7. Design and improve neighborhoods so that they can maintain the authenticity and they are beautiful, safe, and clean, and where people are prioritized over the cars, as we mentioned earlier. I'm going to have some examples later as well. We start focusing more on attracting and retaining people, not just businesses. And that's something that, if anything, I think the pandemic has accelerated and has changed in many of the uses that we see in workplace, but also in other uses around city making or space making. The remote work proved to be successful, but it didn't mean that the death of the cities. It also doesn't mean the death of the office. Remote workers were just inclined or as inclined to go to larger cities as they were to go to rural areas. And for them, it is a choice. Where do they want to be? Do they want to be in the city? Do they want to be in a suburban area? What is exactly the area they want to be? But this is also where companies will likely reduce their footprints. Some might be entirely remote. And this idea of flexibility and choice, this is where it comes into play. So cities should focus on providing the place amenities that will attract and retain residents, particularly the millennial group, which is the largest cohort to want to leave cities. As we think about transit, we're going to have to rethink the transit. While transit system has suffered great losses in revenue, this is an opportunity to rethink transit and provide a seamless system that is multimodal and inclusive of micromobility. Tackle affordability. The city ability to recover and thrive will heavily depend on its ability to address the affordability challenges that we're facing throughout the US. And this might mean rethinking zoning that allows for the conversion of empty office spaces into residential, or rethinking how to improve infrastructure such as electricity or broadband to keep costs low. As we're looking at what developers can do, we look for opportunities to plan, to design, and to provide for a more diverse mix of uses in which it ensures development that is connected seamlessly throughout multiple modes. Also rethinking the different lease terms, provide greater flexibility for tenants, and also look for how to design people at scale that is authentic, and also building on this notion that has been emerging again as accelerated by the pandemic of wellness and health and wellness. Also looking to how we can readapt, redevelop, reposition existing buildings for different uses. What can companies do? The companies can also start reimagining the workplace in a way that they meet the needs for both the hybrid and in-person work, or something else. And consider the hub and spoke model of working. Hubs could allow for the collaboration, the learning, how to instill the company culture, that DNA that really drives organizations forward, while the spokes can provide workers with those shorter commutes and have that flexibility, and then people have the choice if they're going to the office again and staying at the spoke. And when we look at now getting to the ending part of the presentation, is how do we redesign spaces with a greater focus on collaboration, building community, a focus on the well-being, and that may include a lowering density within working spaces, but also looking how we maximize that placemaking that interweaves placemaking within the city. So what will occur in our cities be the same again, given what happened with the pandemic? Are cities going to go back to what it used to be, or are they going to change? And actually the history tells us that no, we're not going to go back to what we used to have. And actually this is an opportunity, as we said at the beginning of the presentation, that if history is any indicator, pandemics, however dire they are, it actually forces cities to change for the better. And if cities like Shanghai, Seoul, Singapore, and I would even say like many places in Florida, have reopened, those are our bellwethers. And it's actually something that gives us a very optimistic picture as to what is to come. So we have seen also in overseas countries that have opened up, that the GDP actually grew post-pandemic. So we actually are in Florida, in some areas of Florida, also experiencing that. Anyways, I think there is a lot that we can talk about the opportunities, but I want to open the opportunity for us to have a more engaging dialogue going through a Q&A. But I think to conclude this part of the presentation, I think for us, we see that this is actually an opportunity to build infrastructure, build cities, build placemaking through the lens of optimism, because if anything, the pandemic had accelerated a lot of the things that we saw were happening before the pre-pandemic times. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts today.
That's awesome, Carlos. Thank you. It's like I said, it's very reassuring to see that many of the things that the people in this audience have been talking about for decades we're actually starting to see these external factors like a pandemic or an epidemic, put them into play faster. So I think it's like we're finally ready to kind of see that come to the reality, especially in some of the areas that you're working in Central Florida and of course across the world, or in South Florida. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of our audience members, I think, are from different parts around the state, certainly trying to get their credentials as they move through our careers. So how do these trends and opportunities change for the small to mid to large cities?
Well, I do think through the lens of cities particularly, and I think we were talking earlier, I think there is a tremendous opportunity now for the public sector to become an agent of change, to start creating an activation about how these different trends are emerging and playing a key role in this horizontal stretch that I mentioned of the way how cities are interweave. And particularly, there is a project that we're working currently that is a mobility hub with the city of Coral Gables in Miami, where they actually are looking for them to be that center of gravity that is connecting the different points that before were more in the central, or traditionally were more in the central business district. They're looking now to become that kind of center of gravity that is actually building for those multimodal experiences. But if you go back then to the macro point of the larger, smaller, and medium cities, I think there is opportunity in all. And I think that as we see the different generations going to different destinations, this is definitely, again, a point in time where cities can look to reinvent themselves in a way that they are more resilient, more pedestrian oriented, and really create that and build upon that concept that I mentioned earlier around the 15-minute city, in which you have all these uses within a walkable distance or a bike ride, that you don't have to take a car to go everywhere, as we tend to do many times in Florida.
Yes, we do. Well, I want to come back to the concept of a mobility hub at the end if we have time. I think it's really fascinating and applicable to a lot of the work that we're doing every day in our communities. I'd like to transition to John and give him a chance. John, you're the boots on the ground for tenants and property investors. What are you seeing in the markets now, and how has that changed or accelerated as a result of COVID?
Sure. Thank you, Autumn. You know, here in our markets, especially as it pertains to tenants, we're still seeing a lot of uncertainty, believe it or not. I mean, companies are still trying to figure out what the best solution is for their individual business. You know, there's an old saying that you never should try to catch a falling knife. I think for a lot of these companies, they want to be completely sure that the knife has truly hit the floor before they attempt to pick it up, right? Of course, we have examples that you've seen over and over of companies wanting to sublease a large portion of their overall space, if not all of their space, so that they can contemplate a permanent remote work environment or workforce. But we also have the opposite side of that, where we've got companies here in Tallahassee and elsewhere that are expanding and relocating for various reasons. But kind of to Carlos's point, in part yours a second ago as well, the one thing that I undoubtedly believe COVID accelerated was companies looking inward at their space and truly investing time, money, and energy into what they really, really need. Where maybe pre-COVID, they were simply complacent with what they'd always had.
Got it. Yeah, I know. And complacency is one thing that you cannot have if you're in the real estate industry. So not an option in the real estate industry, and I'm sure it's not an option for you. So can you tell us a little bit about you and what markets you're working in and some of your biggest clients?
Sure. As you said, I work with NAI Talcor. We are a Tallahassee-based 30-year-old commercial real estate brokerage firm. We handle sales and leasing of commercial properties, buyers, sellers, landlords, and tenants. We also do third-party commercial management. We currently manage just shy of 5 million square feet of office, retail, and industrial, majority of which up and down the I-10 corridor up into South Georgia, South Alabama. We have offices in Tallahassee, Panama City, Florida, and Dothan, Alabama, and hopefully soon to be Mobile and Montgomery, Alabama as well. So we like to say we go from I-75 to I-65 and into South Georgia and and South Alabama as well.
So then,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, you
Well,
just.
I was wondering how you've been seeing some of the data that Carlos shared in that market, the I-10 market or the tertiary markets.
Sure. First of all, Carlos, thank you for that. That data was outstanding and very well put together. It applies with what we do a lot as we find ourselves in the role of educating owners and landlords and tenants, and about how we can help them with their needs and help, contemplating changes in their physical space. Whereas Carlos are the experts in that, sometimes we find ourselves between them and the tenant, right? And in smaller markets like the ones we generally work with, we're seeing a large percentage of employers demand that their employees return to work. We're not hearing much pushback from the employees for doing so. But that said, we do have national and international tenants that seem to be much more open to and experimenting with hybrid and remote work, models. We happen to manage a large percentage of our portfolio is state occupied space. I helped transition a mall in Tallahassee, traditional regional shopping mall, repurposed it into a little over 500,000 square feet of traditional office space, of which we designed, constructed, completed, late 2020, early 21 occupancy. So I would love to know if we were starting that process over today, how would that look different? I don't know. They're all back in the office now, but would we be at a 5 per 1,000 square foot ratio with those guys? I don't know. I think the days of 6 by 6 cubes and 6 by 8 cubes may be over for a little bit.
Yeah, fascinating. But is that with the center of Tallahassee?
It is, yes.
Yeah, so even that though, you've got a school, you've got bookstore, you've got a guitar center and a Ross and a state office building. So I don't even think you'd see that eclectic mix, 20 years ago, in a place like Tallahassee. 10 years ago.
Right.
So while tenants and landlords and realtors may embrace these trends, what are the barriers to actually doing it?
As it pertains to modifying existing spaces, like most, I would say the biggest issue is capital and deciding, who's going to pay for it. As a reminder, many landlords are coming off a year of uncertainty, rental concessions, perhaps rental abatements, and on top of that, a little bit of inflation with price increases for services like janitorial and landscaping and these things. As we have a staffing crunch, I know our janitorial costs have gone up extremely high, and in most cases we don't have the ability to pass that back through to the tenants. So some of these landlords are a little crunched right now, so they may not have an appetite or the funds available to assist to retrofit existing space. So in a lot of instances, nothing really starts to happen until leases get closer to expiration. And it's at that time we're seeing landlords assist with retrofitting space, and obviously landlords' ability to do so and appetite to do so is tied to a tenant's term. So we're also at a strange point in time where our office users and tenants ready, willing, and able to sign on to a long enough term with the uncertainty around their physical space. So, much of this, we're still in a wait and see and an uncertain time because the costs associated with doing so, which right now we all know what construction costs are. Amortizing those costs over a short term don't make sense for any parties involved. So it's an interesting time, and we'll see.
Yeah. So it's really kind of that new construction, new tenants, or renewals of long-term leases by existing tenants. Yeah.
And with a long-term lease, a retrofit that's more than just carpet and paint.
Right. Fascinating. So let's switch to the age-old discussion of the CBD versus the suburbs. Do you find in your markets that you work in, is the central business district becoming more attractive than the suburbs, vice versa, or about neutral?
Yes. No, it is an interesting question, and it seems to be that the suburban environment, does have a little more appeal than maybe it did pre-COVID in a lot of instances. I think Carlos could probably speak to this more, being in the larger market of Miami. whereas our suburban market here in Tallahassee has always kind of fared pretty well. I actually read an article published by ULI last month that said from February of 2020 to August of 21, prices for downtown offices actually contracted. They fell about 4%, whereas prices being paid for suburban offices rose 15% during that same time period. So that data suggests that yes, suburban, nationwide is favored right now. According to the same article and some Cushman and Wakefield data, office vacancies in the CBDs were for the first time in 20 plus years, a higher vacancy rate than in the suburban markets. We are seeing that here locally, but to me, that's different factors than COVID that we can discuss at a different time. That has more to do with inventory being brought online that didn't exist previously. So I think this is a much larger trend in major markets where mass transit, busy streets, crowded elevators, crowded common elements are much more common, and these employees have to navigate, to get to their own desk. Whereas in tertiary markets like ours, they're traveling to work in the safety of their own car. They're getting out on a surface level parking lot, and they're walking through their own front door, avoiding exposure that could potentially make them feel safe or unsafe.
Yeah. But it's a lot of different factors into it, right? And I think this certainly speaks to my heart at Blueprint with the parks that we build. But from a community planning perspective, are those quality of life amenities like parks and trails and multimodal more important post-COVID? I mean, they definitely seem to help draw in investment. But have you seen a factor there with COVID, or is it just kind of continuing to be a good draw?
I think it's continuing to be a good draw. We have seen a little bit of it with COVID. With your involvement in Blueprint and being right here in Tallahassee, we just handled the leasing of the office space around Cascades Park. $35+ million, park with trails and restaurants, and now with the AC Marriott and bars and all these things that I absolutely believe was a huge selling point for us in leasing a lot of that project up at a time when a lot of people weren't leasing office space. I think those amenities played a huge part into that. Wanting to be downtown and having Class A amenities and Class A finishes. The parks, the bars, the trails, all of it was a huge part of it. And I believe, the short term, looking at this thing, Autumn, if remote work increases and employees are able to choose where they can reside, those amenities will play a large role in recruiting employees to certain municipalities, even if the employer resides somewhere else. So these things start to become economic development tools as well.
Absolutely. One of my new favorite phrases is capital follows talent, talent follows place, and place needs investment. And, you guys are certainly saying things I'm completely in step with, and I appreciate that. So we got a chance to I've heard that we've had some chat questions come in. So I want to go ahead and get to it. I've also heard that we can have a little extra time too, because we've had some good questions coming in. Let me see what we can get to here. It's a little tiny. Or it's me and it's not tiny. So we don't know yet, to be determined. Okay, Carlos, do our cities have too much land zoned for commercial activity that we need?
I don't think we have too much land zoned for commercial activity. I think at the end of the day, it's about building for the flexibility that we'll need, and we were talking about this earlier. A lot of times when we go through the zoning and the planification of cities is when what we know at that point of time. But as we all continue to evolve as a society or as cities, those needs change over time. And that's where rezoning and evolving what we know and what we are seeing that is a response to the demand or to demand generators is actually what informs what kind of uses we should be building for, that again tailors to what people are looking for. So I don't know that there is one specific kind of position on that, more so than if we can have flexibility to leverage that where it exists and then rezone it if needed where it applies. That's maybe where the opportunity relies from my point of view.
Thanks. I'm going to go right to the next question. Strong Towns argues that the spaces are too large for small merchants and that incremental instead of large-scale development is more sustainable. What are your thoughts on that? Either one of you.
John, you want to take a stab and then maybe I can?
I don't know that I quite understood the question, to be honest with you.
So incremental changes in a town or wholesale large development reinvestment? It may depend on the market. And
yeah,
the money.
there's places for both depending on all the circumstances involved.
Yeah, my view on that, and there is different examples throughout the states about where you see that there is a master plan that gets put in place that really rezones and changes completely what a certain area had been legacy-wise, and it creates a whole new district that all of a sudden, it's not that you go from one day to the next to change it all, but it's more about really having that idea of what is the future of cities, what is the infrastructure that we want to plan now for a longer period of time, in which that vision or the possible solutions that we need are actually delivered and executed on. I think that there's some examples, again, that we can quote, again, maybe more successful than others, but I can, for example, highlight like Wynwood down here in Miami was kind of an example in which it didn't change overnight, and it's still changing dramatically, but there was a vision as to what this overall area needed it to be. And what I see then as a result of that is that other developers, other players in the real estate market are looking for the lessons learned of what worked and what didn't work in that specific instance, and are looking for other areas in Florida to create more resilient, sustainable, and connected potential for cities. So I think there is some opportunities as a result, but at the end of the day, it's like, what is the vision? Why are you intending to develop a certain area, and how at the end of the day, this is going to improve the built environment and the urban fabric as a result? That's kind of my point of view.
Yeah, I get that. It's like, is there a whole new interchange coming in for an interstate? That's going to have an entirely different land use versus looking at a historic community and trying to preserve the historic integrity.
Right.
So I want to come back to the mobility hubs. I think that's really going to resonate with a lot of people in the audience. Can you describe that a bit more and just tell what kind of opportunities that can bring?
Sure, I think, and this ties directly into the infrastructure potential bill that is going to get implemented. The city of Coral Gables had the vision to become a center of gravity, as I mentioned earlier, to really solve for what the future of mobility is going to be. And when I talk about mobility, it's not just about the mobility of cars. I'm talking about the mobility of pedestrians, people, and how the city as a public municipality can actually start looking for opportunities to align with what residents need, but also respond to those demand generators that could become a source of income for the city itself. So in this particular project, the city had asked us to partner with them to co-create and envision a mobility hub that is going to be a destination for the community. There is going to be at the roof of the building a park in which the community can go there and have events and go with their families, in which we also plan for the potential of centralizing drone deliveries in the future. That's not something that is yet vetted, but there is, again, the future-proofing idea as to how this could be conceived in the future. So instead of having drones delivering packages to your house, actually there is a centralized location that, again, you can have a greater level of control as to where these deliveries happen and how you build it in a more orderly way. As we look at the other programs and components within the building, let me go back now to the ground level. That's the way how we connect as pedestrians with this experience of cities. The ground level is meant to be a connection and a hub to build these multimodal experiences around micromobility. So people can use their own micromobility devices, have it at this location to either be stored or be maintained, and also a way for the community to come together. So we activated the ground floor of this mobility hub in a way that is really an on-demand response to the needs of the community. We plan for pop-up retail, which is also, again, driven and aligned with some of those, oh, sorry, I have my dog in the background barking. But then in between, we have the ability to future-proof the building and have a storing of electric vehicles, along with providing a new concept, which is the commercial operation of fleet management vehicles. And in this case, the city is becoming the landlord for commercial operators that are going to, out of this building, have driverless vehicles operated from this location and then servicing the city. And the other thing that we're doing within the building is fleet management for micromobility, for example, scooters. One of the problems we see throughout many cities in the States, or actually around the world, is that you see scooters everywhere, and they're not in a way stored in a way that is planned. So within this facility, we're planning for where and how this is going to be stored, maintained, but also then in a way that will be servicing the area, maximizing the opportunities that are so. So I'm going to stop there because I know it's probably like a lot of information that I dump on you, but we're looking at mobility as a service and how we can, and this one last comment I'm going to have there, which is that we also know that what we're planning today, just as we plan for cities, things change over time. So when we put in the idea how we're going to structure the building, we didn't do the conventional parking structure. We actually did flat slabs with 12 feet floor to ceiling. So if in the future, the city wants to have the flexibility of changing the use over to a different type of use, the structure of the building won't be an issue. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions on that.
Yeah, that's so neat. One of the things that I love about this concept is that it's so flexible for the future needs while it's addressing current issues like scooters just everywhere, right? And that's stuff that our communities have already embraced and the people have already embraced them, but it's going to be flexible space for the future, which I think is so important for a city using public dollars to invest in spaces that are flexible. And I know it's important on the private sector too. John, I hear you there. Question, in your opinions, what are the best reuses for abandoned golf courses, strip centers, and regional malls? And that's actually the last question that we'll have today.
John, do you want to start or do you want me to start? I can take a stab at it, but I want to open it for you as well if you want to answer it.
Yeah, gosh, I mean, that's a hyper-local question, especially as it pertains to regional malls and strip centers. You know, here in Tallahassee, we were able to luckily have, you know, over 1 million feet of state office space that was relocating in the market. So as opposed to what would have been the worst thing for our local market, which would be that we go out and build 1 million feet of additional office space, thus creating, you know, more vacancy in the market. We were able to repurpose a well-located, you know, inside of I-10, 2 miles from the state capitol, you know, obsolete mall that we could accommodate these state workers in. So that's kind of a local repurpose. You know, as far as golf courses and things to that nature, I mean, single family homes and multifamily and all the things like that are what we see the most. But I'll let Carlos, you know, tackle that one, you know.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, John. I think at the end of the day is, you know, like everything else real estate is about, okay, what is the location telling you is the best use for a specific site? Right. So not because the legacy use is of certain type, it will tell you exactly what the future use will be. And I would probably say that starting with, okay, what are those macro trends are informing the demand generators, as I refer to? What are those uses? What are the needs? But I can tell you that from an anecdotal direct experience that I have with different type of these sites, they vary. They're not less than fits all, but I do see them all now becoming like almost like a mixed-use district, more so than what you have seen in the past, in which the mall now is having adjacent type of uses that help on creating this idea of the destination, and that you're not only going to a mall to just do one thing, you're looking at a mall to have a multitude of different types of experiences where you can entertain yourself, you can do the shopping there, you can actually potentially look for living there. We see clients of ours looking to develop residential uses right within mixed use or within mall settings, and also hotels. So I think the scope of the potential solutions is broad. I don't know, again, that there is one solution that fits all, but there is interesting trends happening as to how you reposition some of these assets classes that you mentioned.
Yeah, right into the concept of third space, right? I mean, I feel like if you just start there as what kind of tenants or public spaces and community spaces that you design through those reuse strategies, if you just think safe third space, it's a great great jumping off point. Speaking of jumping off, thank you both so very much. It's been such a pleasure working with you up to today, and this was nothing less than magnificent. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the attendees. Thank you guys. I'm sure if you were in person, you'd be clapping and possibly standing. So thank you both. Thank you all. And I know there's another session, I think starting at 4:15, I believe. I'll pull it up real quick. Yeah, 4:15, anticipating the 2022 elections. Ooh, there's nothing better than politics. So, right, all the questions. You gotta go.
Yeah, staying out of that one.
Smart. All right, thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Autumn. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.